Welcome back to Ready, Set, Bake, where I teach you how to make Instagram-worthy desserts at home, even if you may be a beginner. My name is Raeya, and in today's episode, we'll be covering everything about decorating cupcakes. Today's a bit of a different episode because we have a very special guest joining us today. Here's Ashleigh from Sweet Dreams Bake Shop.
Hi guys, my name is Ashleigh, and like Raeya said, I run the channel Sweet Dreams Bake Shop on YouTube, and I also have an Instagram as well, SD Bake Shop.
So we're gonna start by coloring our buttercream. I've already made some. I use American buttercream. What buttercream do you usually use?
I always use Italian meringue buttercream. It's kind of like a Swiss meringue buttercream. It gives the same creamy feel, but I just like it because it's a little bit less sweet. But I love American buttercream because I think it holds up really, really well in all temperatures.
And it's also super easy to make as well. That's what I usually use for all of my cakes and cupcakes because it's super easy to make, and like you said, it holds up really well too. I haven't tried Swiss or Italian meringue buttercream, but I would love to give it a try soon. So we're gonna go ahead, we have some blues and some green tones here, and we're gonna go ahead and color our buttercream. I think the most important thing to remember when coloring our buttercream is that we're using a gel-based food coloring rather than that liquid stuff that you get from your local grocery store.
Powdered food coloring is also a great option too because you can use it for multiple things, not just your buttercream.
Yeah, okay, so we're gonna go ahead and color buttercream.
Okay, should we get our hair up?
Sure.
Okay.
Okay, so we have a couple of bowls here. You can just separate them, and then do you want to go ahead and just scoop some into each bowl? And then while she's scooping them, I also have a couple of piping bags and piping tips here. So the first design we're going to be doing is a rosette, and the main piping tips used for this is either a 2D or a 1M tip.
Did you want me to leave some of the white buttercream in here?
Sure, why not? Let's do it just in case. It's always good. I always like to leave a little bit of white buttercream just in case I want to add it if the shade is a little too dark.
Yes, because you can always add a little bit of that, but you can never go back and take away the color, right?
Yeah, okay, so let's talk about our other piping tips. So 1M, I always like to use this for my rosette. A lot of people use 2D.
Oh,
piping tip 2D for the
really?
rosette.
I've always used the 1M classic.
Yeah, me too, but sometimes if I want rosette that looks more like a rose or has a little more of an open style to it, I'll use the 2D. And then also couplers can be really handy if you want to switch between two piping tips and you don't want to switch out the piping bag. So we can go ahead and color our buttercream. Do you want to do
Sure. And so do we want this dark? Do we want to go
So let's do a couple of different shades.
Okay.
We can make some a little darker, some a little lighter. I'll start putting this in here. Mix shades just to make some nice colors. And it's good if you don't have a lot of different food colors, you can just mix them together to create different shades.
Yeah, I think when I first started out, I really made sure to buy all of the primary colors because then that way you really can create any shade you want. And I think it's imperative to get white food coloring as well. And it doesn't actually erase the mistake. It just helps kind of brighten up your color a little bit more.
Yeah, and one of my biggest tips that I use is if I want to lighten up my buttercream, if it's looking a little too yellow, you can actually just add a small drop of purple food coloring to it.
Yes. Same thing if your grays or your blacks are a little bit too purple, you actually add some yellow to cancel that out.
I didn't realize it could go both ways.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
How are we feeling about this shade?
That's beautiful.
Yeah,
I'm liking this one too. What should we do for this one? Do you want to make it a little more of a teal color?
Yeah, let's do that.
Or should we leave it white?
Well, we have this white, so we can always add that.
So maybe a drop of green.
Perfect.
And maybe a little bit more. Oh, I love how it's like a dusty blue kind of color.
I love it.
I'm just making sure there's no food coloring on the sides or left over because that can sometimes look a little streaky when you're piping it out.
See, when I looked at your photos of all your work before, I assumed that you used Swiss meringue buttercream.
Really?
Because of just how smooth it was and creamy looking, which is great.
I find it's easier to use a smaller ratio of butter to powdered sugar. A lot of people will add a lot of powdered sugar and I find that can get a little grainy.
Yes.
And also make sure having like really nice soft room temperature butter helps a lot too. So we can start piping it out. So once again, I'm just using some cheap, just Amazon piping bags here. And we can go ahead and cut the tip and put them in our piping tips.
Now, I know a lot of people actually get intimidated about cutting their piping bag for the first time. Yeah. So I actually learned a little trick with that, if you want me to show you.
Sure. So should we do just the classic 1M tip for a rosette?
Yeah. So what I like to do, always super important to fold over the top of your bag.
That's what I do too. So here, I can do one as well.
I can't get it open. I can't get it open.
I just kind of rub it between my thumb and index.
Perfect.
And that always does the trick.
Okay, so you fold it over.
And then I like to put it between my thumb and index.
Yes. And then you put your piping tip in without it being cut. And then you squeeze it, and then you're gonna take your scissors and you're gonna score it like this.
Oh, that's interesting. I've never done
that way you know exactly where to cut it. You see what I mean? And then I used to go through so many piping bags because I'd cut the hole too big and then it would just shoot right through the bag, right? So this is a great
I gotta be honest, I always do that too.
Yeah. I mean, now I could just eyeball it, but this is a great beginner's tip.
That's a cool trick. I've always just kind of cut off a little bit and then just put it in. So for the other color, which piping tip do you want to do? Let's go for a nice small star tip that we can use for the details. So I can just put that in, and that trick was very good because I definitely cut this way too big.
Right, so what kind of designs are we going for with this?
I like to do a mixed style cupcakes when I pipe them out because I find it looks super fancy. You can make them also super fun and cheerful if you want. And I just like to do a variety of different designs and piping styles on my cupcakes.
Great. So we're just doing like kind of, it's really, really popular right now and trendy to use different types of tips any way that you'd like. And so we just want to make sure we get full coverage on the cupcake, right? Okay, here we go.
So I can just use this one. And when you fill it, how do you fill it?
So there's a couple different ways. Because we're using such a small amount of things right now, it's gonna be totally fine if we just put it in directly, like holding it like this. But if you're having a lot of filling in your bag, you do wanna put it in a cup, is what I generally say.
Yeah, I do that a lot for my macaron batter too, because it's very runny.
Yes, it's super runny and you just don't want it going everywhere, right?
Yeah.
So.
I also like to use my thumb as kind of to scrape the spatula against so I get all that buttercream in there too.
I'm gonna fill my bag up a little differently. So I'm gonna do a little color on this side. I'm gonna go with a little bit of white here.
That's a fun idea.
Now there are different ways to do this. You can do it where you lay out your plastic wrap and then you pipe it.
That's what I usually do.
Yeah, and you're gonna get a really perfect swirl. This is going to give you a little bit more of an abstract look.
And when I have it in my piping bag, I can just squeeze down and it all comes up. We want to make sure that all of the frosting is scraped out from the top, otherwise it could tend to leak out a little bit.
Yes, it can either leak out, or sometimes if you're working with your piping bag for a really long time with American buttercream, it can form a crust in there and you're gonna get crusties falling out. So you really want to be careful with that.
It's also important not to overfill your piping bag because it can make it really hard to pipe. So we have some chocolate and some vanilla cupcakes here that I baked earlier.
Love it.
And I can start to decorate them.
Okay. I'm gonna start with a little rosette, I think.
That's beautiful. I always like to start with the bigger piping tips and then I can go in with my details. So I'm just gonna grab another piping bag and I'm just gonna use the 2F piping tip, which will give us a really nice ruffly design. And I'm gonna do that same trick that you did except with the 2 different shades of blue.
Yes, yes. So I like to start with, just like you said, the bigger portion first, and then you can just fill in all of those details. More than likely, you're not gonna be able to fit on another rosette of this size unless you overlap, which can look great too, but I wanna keep things a little bit more flat.
When I'm making a rosette, I hold it from the top, like I said earlier. There's different ways to hold a piping bag. So how do you hold yours?
I hold mine like this, and then I hold it like that.
Me too. Yeah. I find that's the easiest way to get the most control.
Yes, I know a lot of people do like to kind of hold it like this. I just find that it's more control for me like this, but really use whatever works for you.
And I like to actually take the cupcake in my hand so I can just move it around. If you're doing it flat on here, I like to just use my index finger as a little kind of placement guide for me to use because my hand tends to be a little shaky when I'm piping, especially with the smaller details. So I'm grabbing in my hand and I'm applying pressure from the top.
Ooh, I do like that tip.
And making a little swirl. And when I'm cutting it off, I'm using a flick of my wrist while I let go of the pressure.
Awesome. I think I want to use your bag here. It's always nice too when you're doing cupcakes like this to get all your piping bags ready to go. That way it's super quick for you to get it done.
And I'm just gonna do a kind of a shell design on the side. And I'm just making little bumps and rounds as I go, kind of like the ocean waves. I love the colors we've got here.
Yes, they all go together so well. Oh, I love that technique.
And this is great if you're doing the border of cakes too.
Perfect.
Do you want to use this?
So you can see here that I actually managed to fit on another rosette. I used the different piping tip here, but I have a gap, and that's the big thing. We don't want to have any gap. So I'm going to do your same kind of seashell thing here.
And I'm just gonna fill up another piping bag because one of my other favorite tips is the 104. And this does some really nice zigzag designs on the cupcakes, which gives it a lot of variety, especially if you're using a lot of star tips.
Yes. Here we've got one of our finished cupcakes here.
That's beautiful. I love how you use the two different rosette styles.
Yes, yeah, and you can see I used the exact same tip, but I did something a little bit different, made a little bit of a squiggle, and then here on this one, did the seashell border. Really fun.
So now that we've started decorating our cupcakes, I have a couple of questions for you.
Yes.
What's your favorite part about your YouTube channel and making content?
I love that I can make whatever I want. So if I'm in the mood to make something, having a channel gives me the ability to do that. When I was taking on a lot of orders, you tend to get the same things over and over because people want from you what they, see that you've done already. So the YouTube channel allows me to just make whatever pops into my head. And it makes jumping on different trends a lot easier because of course, when you're just baking for fun at home, it's great, but then you're shouldering all of the cost of whatever it is that you're doing. Whereas the YouTube channel really helps me, my supporters really help me to be able to continue to make things. And it's great. It's just a really nice reciprocal relationship.
Yeah, and I know, especially if you're known for a certain style of cakes, you can do that over and over because that's what your customers want too. Now, Ashleigh's channel is super great if you're a beginner or even more advanced because she covers all sorts of different techniques, and her videos are honestly so addictive to watch too. So I'm gonna go ahead and fill this in. Now, if you're doing just a classic rosette on a cupcake, how do you usually do that?
So classic rosette, like let's say if I wanted to actually do full coverage on this whole cupcake, we can do that too. I love mixing that in. Now the 1M tip is great, it's big enough. This one is really great if you wanna have more frosting on there. I personally like it a little bit less, so I'm gonna use my 1M tip. I'm gonna start right from the center. Now it really doesn't matter what direction you go in. You can go clockwise, counterclockwise. What matters is that you start from the center. That's the part that matters. So we're gonna start here. Even pressure the whole way through. Okay, so I wanna show you what happened just there. What happened was I had an air bubble in here. So if that happens, don't worry. All you have to do,
you just scrape it off.
You just scrape it off. Do you have a clean knife actually?
Yeah.
Yeah, you just scrape it off. And I'm gonna put this back into the icing that is this color because of course I can't put it back into the white, but you can just remix that and you're gonna be fine. Don't worry, it's all gonna get covered up.
I know a lot of people panic when they have air bubbles.
Exactly.
When I first started decorating cupcakes too, I would get all stressed out if there was an air bubble because I'm like, my rosette is ruined.
Yeah, and you know what? There's always ways to fix it, okay? There's always ways to fix your baking no matter what. Even when you're writing on cakes or you're writing on cupcakes, which is like, you're gonna make mistakes for sure. Always ways to cover it up.
I know writing is kind of like my worst nightmare on cakes.
Yes, and to avoid the air bubbles. So see, we added in a little bit more. I'm gonna give it a good squeeze. I don't feel any air bubbles in there, so I'm going to try that again.
Wow.
And there we just have our rosette.
So when I'm doing rosettes, I do it a little differently.
Yeah, show me.
I love how there's so many different techniques, even if it's just one style like a rosette. So I'm just gonna go ahead and fill this. We don't want like too little of icing in our piping bag because it won't give us that full coverage. Like we said, we really want to make sure that there's a little more than we need for the actual rosette. I'm gonna go ahead and fill it. I'm actually gonna put a little bit more of this blue in here.
Yes.
I love how like the different shades kind of blend together when you're piping it out. So my piping bag, and like I said, just give it a little squeeze just to make sure everything's going properly.
Yeah.
And if you see your tips getting a little too messy, you can just give it a little wipe off.
And you do want to wipe it off because then your design is going to end up looking a little bit mushy if you don't do that.
So I have a cupcake here. I'm going to use a chocolate one. And I like to overlap the end parts a little bit, just because I find it makes it look a little more full. I know that's a lot of frosting, but that's how I love my rosettes. But it depends. If you want less frosting, you can go for Ashleigh style of rosette, or if you want a little more, you can go for this kind of fuller look.
And if you ever want to cover up your ends, like maybe you don't like that cut edge, I always like to put a little bit of sprinkle on there or something fun. It adds a really nice crunch to your cupcakes.
Yeah.
But this looks so elegant too.
And we'll be adding sprinkles to our cupcakes later on too.
Fun.
So I'm gonna go ahead and just do a little more. So I have a few more questions for you. So when did you start baking?
Oh, I think back in 2009 is when I really started baking quite a bit. I always loved it as a child, but I wasn't actually allowed to bake.
I saw that on Instagram, yeah.
I wasn't actually allowed. My parents, it's interesting, they were not overly strict, but when it came to things like, of course, doing well in school and stuff like that, of course, that was a really big deal. But for some reason, they were very strict about baking. And I just wasn't, we lived in a very, very pristine, clean house. So it wasn't that, like when my mom tasted my baking, she liked it. But she just really wanted the house to be clean. So I just never really did it in front of them. And so because I had to do it in secret, I couldn't develop those skills, at an age like you are, which is great. I think that would have been really awesome had I been able to do that a little bit more. But it's also kind of cool because I feel like because I had the ability to go drive and, go out and buy my own supplies at that age already, then I was able to work on like a lot of different things. Yeah.
I started baking a couple of years ago. I know a lot of people started baking with quarantine.
Yes.
And like COVID. So that's when I actually started too. And yeah, I fell in love with baking and especially cake and cupcake decorating too.
Yes.
I started with the more basic stuff like muffins, cookies, and then I kind of branched out to cake and cupcake decorating.
Well, and I saw your macarons on your Instagram, which I was so impressed with. Like, those are not easy to make at all.
I know, it took me a long time to master it. I know it can be very intimidating, but once you get the process down, it's really a lot simpler to do.
Yes.
So with this piping tip, I kind of do a zigzag. I'm just moving my wrist mostly, and I just kind of do it at the end. On this one, I'm gonna do a little swirl design.
Pretty.
I'm just moving it back and forth. What's your favorite cake that you've made?
Oh, this is so tricky. It's so hard
it's hard to decide, yeah.
Because after you make them, you're just like, that's the best cake I've made. No, that's the best cake I've made. I think it's that, I don't know if you've seen this one, but it was where I did a Spider-Man bust.
Oh, I haven't seen that one
so it was
yet.
like a Spider-Man carved cake, which it wasn't huge. Like, I've made way bigger cakes. For my daughter's cake, we made I think she was turning 2. I made this Minnie Mouse cake, and it was 4 feet tall. It was very, very tall. But it was also kind of a scary cake because we were like, is it gonna tip over? Did we put enough supports in it? That was when I really learned about like industrial supports for your cakes.
This is how the finished cupcake looks.
Oh, that's so fun looking. I love it. Very beach vibes. Yeah, but I still think that the Spider-Man cake was my favorite because it was just so, I don't know, it was just like, it came together a lot more easily.
And you can see Ashleigh's doing a lot of different designs with the same piping tip.
Yeah.
She's doing swirls, she's doing shells, stars, all of that kind of stuff. So you can see, even if you only have a couple of piping tips, you can do so many different designs with them. So I heard you worked at a couple of bakeries.
Yes, I have. I worked at my friend's bakery. She owns it now, but it was actually a different owner when I first started working there. And it was really interesting how I got to working there because I was already teaching. I had my other job that I do, and they reached out to me because I had all of my cookies. I actually started with sugar cookie decorating. Yeah,
that's so
cakes
cool.
came way later. And so she wanted to hire me so that I could do sugar cookies for the bakery. It ended up, we didn't even really do that many sugar cookies. Sugar cookies is one of those things that is
Very time consuming.
very labor intensive. And so it makes it a little bit trickier to sell them. And so I ended up just making like cupcakes and cakes instead. And I remember, I think it was, I had just gotten married. And then I said to one of the girls that worked at the shop, I said, okay, I'll see you later. And they're like, oh, when are you coming back? And I was like, next week, I'm getting married this week.
Oh, wow.
And then they were like, and you're just coming back next week? I'm like, yeah. You know, that's my love of cake and cupcakes though. Like that is just how much I love it. And yeah, and then that person that said that to me actually turned out to become my best friend later on. And yeah, so she ended up taking over the shop. But yeah, the 3 weeks after I originally got hired, my boss said, oh, you know, Rachel is going to be away, so can you make this 3-tiered cake? And me being like, oh, I don't want to say no, but I literally had no idea what I was doing. But I made it and I did it and it was fine, but we put 0 supports in the cake.
Actually?
Yeah, so it was like a 10-inch, an 8-inch, and a 6-inch. Just all stacked. No dowel in the center,
Actually,
nothing.
Did it stand up?
Yep, it was perfectly fine. And then the
That's
customer was like, we loved it. And I was like, thank goodness, because I was nervous. And my boss actually had, she was like, I was having a panic attack, like, you know, earlier on. Because she was like, I had just visions of it falling over. So she actually drove to the shop, you know, early in the morning to make sure that it hadn't, which is just, it was ridiculous that we put no supports in it, but you know, that's how you learn.
Yeah, when I made my first tiered cake, it was actually, I work with really small cakes. It was just a 6-inch and a 4-inch.
Yeah, I love that
I don't really have
size.
that many people. I've already given so much cake and desserts to my friends when I bake it. I've ran out of people to give it to. So I just work with really small cake layers.
Right.
But sometimes when decorating that 4-inch cakes, it can be a little difficult.
For sure,
Yeah.
it can be really, really tricky.
Oh, a nice rose.
Yeah, and you know what? This rose is really simple to do. I know people get intimidated by the looks of this, but really, I'm just creating rainbow arcs and stopping after each one, and it's just about overlapping it.
And you can see, yeah, she's just overlapping it. And I saw earlier on that you started with a little bud and you kind of,
Yes.
the tip was angling more towards the cupcake, and as you move on, it's angling more away from you.
That's right. And so with American buttercream, what's great is that your butter content is so high, so it can actually hold this type of design. If you're noticing that your ends are flopping over, you need to add more butter, just like you said. I know a lot of people jump to the confectioner sugar or the powdered sugar, but you need more butter.
The butter is what's gonna add that stability
Yes.
and stiffness to it.
And see here, I'm not being too picky about how the side here is not completely covered, because when you look at it from the top, it does look completely covered.
So we finished decorating our cupcakes. I love how they turned out, and now we can add our final touches. So here I have a couple of different varieties of sprinkles. I have some gold silverettes, which are just kind of little balls that are metallic. And then I have some white, just pearl sprinkles, and then some edible glitter, which is my favorite thing to use. So we can go ahead and just put it, I have a little teaspoon in there just so we can add it easily and it won't go everywhere. Thanks. So I have a bunch of different sizes in here, which will add a lot of texture to our cupcakes.
Now what's interesting is we let this buttercream set a little bit, and the sprinkles are still sticking really, really well to it. Sometimes I find, and I think that's because of your really good butter content in here and the ratio that you used. Sometimes I find if you don't add the sprinkles right away to American buttercream, and especially if it's really cold in your environment, your sprinkles won't stick anymore.
Because American crusts up really easily.
It does, yeah.
So I find that adding less powdered sugar and adding a little bit more butter into my buttercream can really help with that too. So when I add the sprinkles, I like to add it to kind of the edge of where I cut off my rosette. So because that kind of helps seal or cover that little raw edge there.
I know some people get a little bit, I know like for example, my mother-in-law, she really doesn't like it with the large sprinkles because they hurt her teeth, but these are great. They're just small enough to get a little bit of crunch. And I say if you're going any bigger with a sprinkle, go for something like a 6-lit, which is just chocolate, really.
Yeah, it's just covered in chocolate.
Yeah, and they're nice and big though, so they give you that glam look if you're looking for that.
And I don't love sprinkles on my desserts, but these ones are a really great option because they're not too crunchy, they don't really add texture, but they add a really nice finished look to your cupcakes.
I have so many sprinkles. Like at home, I just have so many because I am like in love with sprinkles. It is my thing. But they do go bad after about 6 months.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so you do want to use them up within that time. They'll start to develop kind of a Play-Doh-y smell, is how I describe it. And then you'll know that you can just toss them. But I mean, honestly, just dump a bunch of sprinkles on your next batch of cupcakes and you'll be fine.
Yeah. So does that apply with the silverettes too?
Yeah. Any of them. These I do find do a little bit better, so they have a bit of a longer shelf life, but these ones for sure, the non-palets, they definitely have a little bit of that Play-Doh smell that does happen. Quins as well, which are the flat type of sprinkles that are cut out into like different shapes.
That's used for confetti cakes, right?
Yes, yes. Can we add on some of this? So what brand is this one?
This is just a Wilton brand, and I find that it's pretty inexpensive compared to other types of things. I know Luster Dust can be pretty pricey, but this you can just get from your local grocery store and it works amazing.
Yes, and I think that this is going to give us a little bit more of a kind of glittery sheen as opposed to the disco dust look, which is like in your face glitter. This is going to be a nice little sheen on there. And I like to, when I do this, you don't want to put your pump down like this because you're not going to get that nice spray. These are actually meant to be this way so that you get kind of the overspray. And do be careful about where you're spraying this. Yeah. Because it will go everywhere.
I know the first time when I did it, it just went into the air and nothing was on my cupcakes.
Yes. This actually has a really nice pump to it.
And you can actually put this directly into your buttercream if you want that kind of glittery look.
Yes.
And that, I don't think you can do that with a lot of different glitters, but that works great with this one. Thank you so much for joining us on today's episode, and thank you so much, Ashleigh, for sharing all of your amazing baking tips and expertise with us.
And thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.